I've never taken the bar exams, but I did once own a bar, spent many years behind the bar. So if lawyers were bartenders, here's the Karen Reed case from both sides, presented to a jury of 12 people sitting around the bar. Look, I understand if you only want to hear things in a one-sided way, from one side or the other, whatever side your sympathies lie. It's human nature. We put ourselves on a side, and then we only want to hear evidence that supports that side. Once we've made up our mind, hearing the other side isn't much fun. But some of you prefer trying to see things from all angles. You think there's a benefit in that. I do too. So I'm taking up the challenge of attempting to argue both sides of the case as vigorously as I can. Time is limited, so I won't have time to hit on every piece of evidence. I'll make an argument based on what I think is the most compelling evidence. Everyone will be mad at me. If you think Reed is guilty and the state's case is completely on the up and up, you'll be outraged. Or if you think she's innocent, you'll want to challenge me to a fight. But I'm a pussycat, so let's stick to verbal jousting. If you think I got any particular facts wrong here, okay, I'm always ready to be corrected. And maybe, just maybe, you might be willing to reevaluate some of your own facts. Maybe some things aren't as sure as you think. But you and I are not on trial, so let's keep it friendly. If you don't like the arguments I've made here, reach out. I'd be happy to record you making your own arguments. We can do it on Zoom, and I'll put it on the channel. So 2 bartenders will present this case, Blarney Kev and Leeds Kev. As is customary in a real court, the prosecution will go first. So here is Blarney Kev. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Blarney Kev. I tended bar for years at the Blarney Stone Pub in Worcester, Massachusetts. In that role, I helped settle many arguments. Since I was no Patrick Swayze, I tried to settle things by listening carefully and being fair. So here we go. Let me begin at ground zero. At 12:31, Boston police officer John O'Keefe's phone stopped moving. It didn't move again until police found it under O'Keefe's body after 6 a.m. and picked it up. What else happened at 12:31? The black box from the SUV driven by O'Keefe's girlfriend, Karen Reed, indicates there was a collision at the exact location the body of O'Keefe was found. That collision also occurred at 12:31, exactly when O'Keefe's phone stopped moving. Her car was going in reverse. The device records any collision over 5 miles per hour. State police accident reconstruction teams have not been able to piece together exactly what happened. But there's no question that Reed's vehicle was in a collision at the exact moment and place where O'Keefe stopped moving, presumably due to a fatal wound received on the back of his head. The taillight on her vehicle was found broken. Alcohol levels in her blood, which was drawn several hours later, are calculated to be well above the level of legal intoxication. Surveillance video from the bar backs this up based on the number of drinks that she had. Bartenders are practical jurists, so we could probably end our case here, right? But since the defense has been trying the case in public and has raised questions and accusations at pre-trial hearings, we're going to go into things in more depth. Reed and O'Keefe had been out drinking. When they reached the bar called the Waterfall, they ran into others from town that they knew, or in some cases at least knew of. Jen McCabe was an old friend of O'Keefe's. Her sister is married to another Boston cop, Brian Albert, who didn't really know O'Keefe well. When the bar was closing, McCabe and her husband invited O'Keefe and Reed to join them at an after-hours party at the home of Brian Albert, her brother-in-law. O'Keefe was not entirely sure how to get there, so McCabe was in regular touch as they drove, giving him directions. But Reed didn't want to go into the house. She later explained to investigators that she was a grown-ass woman. Apparently, after-hours parties were for younger people. When they got there, she refused to go inside. Perhaps they argued the two had been fighting a lot lately. At last, O'Keefe got out of the car. A cocktail glass was found at the scene, so maybe he had it in his hand. Broken glass was eventually found on Reed's bumper. After the collision at 12:31, Reed drove home to O'Keefe's house. She arrived at 12:41. The ride might normally take somewhere about 7 minutes, but it was snowing. Reed was quite drunk, and she isn't from Canton, so she's not familiar with the neighborhood. Over the next several hours, she didn't sleep. She called O'Keefe's cell phone dozens of times. She left angry voice and text messages. The defense might try to distract you with an argument that these calls and messages indicate innocence. Why leave angry messages on the phone of someone you just killed? Well, first, I'd like to remind you about the black box evidence. Black box evidence doesn't lie. Some parts of O'Keefe's phone data might be open to interpretation, but this is not. He stopped moving at 12:31, the same time as the impact. That data is beyond dispute. Human behavior, on the other hand, can be more tricky to explain. So why would she leave angry messages? Maybe she didn't realize she'd struck O'Keefe. Maybe she realized it on some level, but compartmentalized that knowledge, putting it away in a quiet room and closing the door, didn't want to think about it. Subconsciously, she was aware her life, as she knew it, was over. She was going to jail. Her career was over. DUI, leaving the scene, manslaughter, she didn't want to think about it. But the subconscious mind knew there's no locked doors from the subconscious. And that subconscious thought stream produced anger. Her life was ruined. And why? Because John made her take him to an after-hours party. This anger was reprocessed in her brain. She avoided the locked room where knowledge of what she really did was. But she was angry, and she vented on him. After all, he'd ruined her life by making her drive him to that party. Hours later, she had O'Keefe's niece, who he had custody of, help her get in touch with Kerry Roberts. Reed had woken the niece with her screaming, angry tantrums in the house that night. Reed then drove to Jen McCabe's. Maybe some part of her still denied to admit what happened. The human mind is tricky. It can be hard to understand. But black box data is not. Cell phone data showing that the phone stopped moving is not. Arriving at McCabe's hysterical, she went on with the charade of searching for John. Because she was drunk, McCabe had Roberts pick them up. They went to O'Keefe's first. McCabe and Roberts thought maybe he'd come home. Then they went to Albert's house. Karen Reed was the first to spot the body of her boyfriend lying in the snow. 911 was called. EMS arrived. First responders testified that Reed, hysterical, was saying she hit O'Keefe. Now, why would Reed do this if she wanted to point the finger somewhere else? Who can say? But she's an intelligent woman. She knows there will be ring cameras and car evidence and phone evidence. She knows that if her SUV hit O'Keefe, there will be no way to hide it. And that little compartmentalized door was now open a little. In her mind, the truth was trickling from her subconscious into her conscious. Fragments of memory, putting the car in reverse in an angry outburst, hitting the gas, the thud. Awful to think about, but she knew. And now there was only one way to play it. Convince people you had no idea that you'd struck someone. Let yourselves seem horrified, and in a way you kind of were. Make it seem like you're just learning this now, because ultimately the truth will come out. So such admissions of guilt at the scene will only help her down the road when she tries to argue it was an accident and that she had no idea until they found him hours later. Does this explain Karen Reed's behavior at the scene the next morning? Maybe, maybe not. We can't know what was in her mind. But we do know the black box data. We know the phone data. We know there's a broken taillight. Broken cocktail glass was found on the bumper and human hair, which matches to John O'Keefe. Before we get to the absurd and wild arguments we know the defense will float in a desperate effort to create doubt, we want to address what is beyond dispute. Yes, the black box data, as we said, it is what it is. The defense might attempt to argue the state police have falsified the black box data report. Okay, let's assume the state police do that kind of thing. But here's the problem. The data on the drive is still available. It hasn't been erased. The defense team has it too. It can't be rigged. Someone might falsify a report about that data, but the data is the data. So the police doing that would be foolish since the data is still there and any falsification would be quickly detected. So Karen Reed's SUV collided with an object at 12:31 while it was going in reverse. It happened exactly where the body was found. Look, it's the job of the defense to create reasonable doubt. As the Turk said in The Godfather, when learning that Tom Higgins had done his homework, "A salute." I salute you. You're good. Well, we say the same thing here to the defense team. "A salute." Using bloggers, you managed to craft a theory built on half-truths and deceptions, and you've created a narrative in the public mind of corruption and conspiracy. A salute. You had to smear innocent people, but you're paid to keep your client out of jail, and all's fair in love and law, right? A salute. You've created public doubt about our hard-working law enforcement agencies, something which does our communities much harm, but you've earned your substantial fee. A salute. The defense has produced someone they call an expert who reports that Jen McCabe searched at 2:27 a.m. how long to die in the cold. The analysis by State Trooper Guerrero showed that the search actually took place at the scene where first responders were trying to save O'Keefe. This was after 6 a.m. But because the defense disputed this, we went out and hired one of the most qualified and respected independent forensic data analysts you can find. And her analysis confirms that of Trooper Guerrero. Likewise, the defense team claims McCabe deleted messages around that time. Again, the independent expert proves this is wrong and a misunderstanding of how the app works. The defense has concocted claims that injuries on O'Keefe's arm are evidence of a dog attack, but our medical examiner, whose credentials are not in question, describes these as abrasions. The defense says O'Keefe looks to have been in a fight, and indeed, he does. Canton police at the scene probably thought the same thing, but expert examination of those wounds instead shows only significant injury to O'Keefe's head. He was struck by an object on the back of the head, hard enough to break bones in his skull, which led to swelling which occurred in his eyes. What appears to be bruising on his hand is rigor mortis. The medical examiner concluded there were no signs of a fight. She determined the injuries on the arm were abrasions. You or I might look at that swelling on his eyes, the bruise on his hand, or the scratches on his arm, and come up with different interpretations. But we're not medical examiners. We don't look at corpses for a living. Some of us might still be tempted to be skeptical of the medical examiner's report. Maybe she's part of some elaborate conspiracy. We don't discourage you from asking those kinds of questions. A jury should ask questions. But we have to remind you that the black box can't lie. The data is the data. So even if there was a conspiracy big enough to make Oliver Stone blush, there's no way to rig the black box. There's no way to hide the fact that O'Keefe was found exactly where that collision occurred. There's no way to hide the fact that O'Keefe stopped moving at exactly the same time Reed's SUV had a collision in reverse. As legendary coach Belichick likes to say, it is what it is. You might entertain the possibility of a conspiracy that would require the involvement of 11 people inside the house, the Canton police, the state police lab, the medical examiner, and of course me, the prosecutor. You'll have to ask yourself why all these people would be willing to go to jail for a long time in order to cover up someone else's crime. There's no evidence lead investigator Proctor was a friend of Albert's. But maybe if you do a 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon kind of thing, you can convince yourself it's all connected in some elaborate and secret way. Look, we live in a crazy world. Conspiracies at some level do happen. So I don't fault you for keeping an open mind to such possibilities. A conspiracy involving that many people of good reputation, would be very unlikely and very hard to pull off. But we should keep an open mind, right? Maybe Trooper Proctor owed Brian Albert a favor, right? Maybe not everyone involved understood initially that they were participating in the cover-up of a murder, and by the time they did, they were compromised, right? All of this would be a stretch, but the world is weird. However, the black box data is beyond dispute. What happened is beyond dispute, beyond reasonable doubt. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Leets Kev. I, too, have settled many disputes in my day at Leecham's Pub, also in Worcester. I'm going to apologize in advance because I might get a little too passionate in my defense here because I feel really passionate about this. Angry, in fact, and worried, but much more than my client. I employed several cops over the years, and several more were good friends, still are. I feel very confident in telling you two things about cops. One, most cops are good people. You'd want one as a father, a neighbor, a friend. And they do a good job serving the public. They're the good guys, usually. However, the second thing I can tell you about cops is that they have a lot of trouble investigating cops. It's human nature to be loyal to those you work with and want to help them out. But there's a unique problem that sets in with police. It's the job of the police to enforce the law, but most cops don't believe the law should be enforced on other cops. Even the most straight-laced cops, the guys who don't like taking a free coffee at Dunkin' Donuts, don't believe speeding laws apply to them. In fact, those speeding laws probably don't apply to their wives either. And that's how it starts. Cops help other cops and their families to get out of trouble. Like I said, this is human nature, and usually it doesn't lead to any major problems. Just a perk, right? But sometimes this goes further than fixing tickets, a lot further. And sometimes this network of favor trading can sweep in cops from various police agencies, other types of officials, and even prosecutors. Does this favor trading include covering up murders, framing an innocent woman? No, not at first. It's not like a cop calls up another cop and says, "Hey, bud, I need a favor. My kid bro lost his cool and we need to plant some evidence." That's not how it works. It starts out small and reasonable, maybe something like, "Hey, my wife's been dogging me lately, so I need you to help me keep this investigation from going through my house, all right, man?" Something like that will sound like an ordinary run-of-the-mill favor, not a murder cover-up. But once an investigation has been corrupted, anyone who has done anything to contribute to the corruption now has no choice but to go all the way. In for a penny, in for a pound. So who will stand up and do the right thing in such a situation where all the officials and officers and lawyers all play ball for the same team? There's only one type of person who can. A very small group. The very last line of defense. The police community defends each other in a thin blue line. But in corruption cases, the public depends on a narrow wall with only 12 bricks. 12 men and women. You are that last line of defense. This case we're putting before you is going to trouble you the rest of your life. It's going to rock the foundation of everything you believe in. At the end of it, we probably still won't have a clear picture of exactly what happened that January night in Canton. But one thing we will have a clear picture of. This investigation was corrupted from the first minute of the first day to the last. The power to combat that corruption lies completely in your hands. The buck stops with you. Only you can stand up to them. Now let's get to the evidence. We'll come back to the black box later, but let's warm you up with this. The black box is a little computer behind a car's steering wheel. It's not a complicated device. They don't break. It records up to 5 collisions. If there's a collision, cops just download the data from the drive. You can read samples of these online. It's so simple a caveman could do it, or a state trooper. But the Massachusetts State Police took 16 months to do it, in a case where another cop was dead, a case where someone had been charged with second-degree murder, a case where the defense had been pointing out a long list of very unusual actions or lack of actions on the part of investigators. 16 months. It took 16 months to plug that black box into a computer and print out the data. Maybe they were busy. Maybe guys were on vacation. We'll come back to it. But as the state presents you with experts on the victim's wounds and on the data on the phone of the main witness, Jen McCabe, just keep that 16 months in mind. They want you to forget it, but be strong. Let's start from the beginning of the investigation. The Canton police arrived to find Officer O'Keefe on the front lawn a little after 6 a.m. First responders were trying to revive him. He looked like he'd been in a fight. One of his shoes was missing. Despite the snow, he was only wearing a thin shirt with no jacket. There were what appeared to be deep wounds along much of his right arm. His right hand looked like he'd punched someone. The man's girlfriend, Karen, was there, hysterical, as they tried to fruitlessly save him. She told them that she dropped him off at a party the night before. There was a broken cocktail glass. What any cop would think, and what these cops clearly did think, was that the victim had been in a fight, either inside the house or right here on the street. And his shoe couldn't be found. Was it inside the house? If police didn't believe there'd been a fight, why did they collect 6 drops of bloody snow they found at the scene? You see, you don't collect blood evidence at a hit and run. You take pictures so you can determine the movements of people and vehicles. But the only reason to collect blood is if you want to test it. And if you want to test the victim's blood, there's plenty of it inside his body. No, you only want to test the blood evidence that you find there if you think it might belong to someone else, presumably the person he got in a fight with. The first police to arrive who were on scene running the investigation for a few hours were regular Canton cops. They clearly believed O'Keefe had been in a fight. That's why they collected the blood. So why didn't they go inside the house where the party had been? The house where the victim was found on the lawn. The house where the girlfriend said he was going into. Maybe the shoe was inside the house. I mean, it's not like someone attacked this guy on the street and stole his shoe. The shoe was either there somewhere or inside the house. But they didn't go inside the house. As it turned out, the sister-in-law of the owner of the home was right outside here. She'd driven there with Karen, yet no one from inside the house came out. All the flashing blue and red lights, the sirens, the vehicles all around the house, no one came out. Yet, police saw no need to go inside. Let's pause here and ask a question. It's pretty clear that anyone with even modest intelligence would understand the need to investigate what went on inside the house, to directly question the owners as soon as possible. You don't need police training to understand this. Every reasonable person understands it. So we're left at a fork in the road. We either turn left or right, door number 1 or door number 2. No other options, one or the other. Either these cops were complete idiots or something else was going on. That's your choice. Well, while not every cop is a rocket scientist, there are no idiots on the police force. You have to score high on an exam. You have to pass the academy. There were no idiots that morning. So something else was going on. Your Honor, you must put a stop to this nonsense. We can't have a trial if Leeds Kev is going to question the very system which this trial is a part of. All right, this is a fair point, Blarney Kev, and that's why this trial is taking place on YouTube instead of with an actual judge. So please, go serve some drinks over there and let me continue. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, you can see that the investigation came off the wheels right there at the beginning. We're not talking about mistakes. We're not talking about sloppiness, because this involves intent. It involves misconduct. They weren't fixing a speeding ticket. There was a dead man on the front lawn, a man who'd been dropped off to attend a party at that house. There was a missing shoe. The man looked like he'd gone 10 rounds with Mike Tyson, 21-year-old Tyson. The homeowners strangely did not come out to see what was going on, despite the fact that their sister-in-law was out there and centrally involved. The local cops would have learned very quickly that the dead man was a Boston cop. Why didn't they go into that house and look for the shoe? Look for signs of a struggle. Examine the occupants for signs of having been in a fight. Ladies and gentlemen, you are people of the world. You have your own extensive life experiences to shape your judgment. And you sense the answer to my question is because the cops were protecting whoever was in the house. It's obvious, right? What remains to be determined is why. Was the homeowner someone powerful, like a mayor or a celebrity? Was he a friend of theirs? Was he Don Corleone and they were afraid? Or was it maybe just because he was a fellow cop? Cops can drive whatever speed they want, right? A job perk. Well, another perk is probably that you don't go into the home of a cop unless you're forced to. The order must come down from higher authority. Without that order, you become Sergeant Schultz. I see nothing. We get it. Cops don't want to investigate cops. It's a brotherhood. Someday the shoe might be on the other foot. Maybe that's a bad metaphor to use here. But the order never came. Never. The house was never investigated. And it's too late now because it went through renovations, including floors being replaced, and it was sold. Now, we can offer you an investigation of the investigators. We can point out the deep connections between the homeowner and the Canton police, such as the fact that a brother of the homeowner was on the local police force. The homeowner was a very prominent Boston cop who had been the star of a reality show, a kind of super cop. He'd made a lot of friends. One seems to have been the Canton cop, Officer Lank, who was called into work later that morning to take over the investigation. Another might have been State Trooper Proctor, called in to take over for the Canton police. But we don't actually have to establish these connections, because what you can't get around, absolutely can't get around, is that the investigation was corrupt. It was corrupt that morning when the first cops refused to investigate the home or the homeowner. It was corrupt right there at the scene when they seized on the narrative that Reed ran him over, even as they were gathering blood they assumed belonged to his attacker. It was corrupt when the blue wall of protection formed around the homeowner. It was corrupt when they failed to secure the crime scene. It was corrupt when the medical examiner they called on looked at serious scratch and puncture wounds on his arm and called them abrasions. It was corrupt when she concluded that there were no signs he'd been in a fight. It was corrupt when Trooper Proctor wrote a sloppy report where so many names were misspelled and timelines about towing Reed's vehicle were off by an hour. If there's one thing police are taught to do, it's to write meticulously accurate reports. They're taught to check and double-check. Everything must be perfectly accurate. In a murder case, that work would be double-checked by a supervisor. The inaccuracies in Proctor's report almost seem like an attempt to help Reed be acquitted. Makes sense. Who could feel good about sending an innocent woman to jail? But that was not the goal anyway. The goal was to protect the Boston cop who owned the home and his family. Thin blue line. The question some of you must be asking is just how high can this cover-up go? The answer is shocking. And the only people who can stand up to them are you. The state police and the prosecution have taken over a year to hand over basic evidence that every accused person is entitled to. Any one of us could find ourselves in that situation. The other side took over a year to give us the phone records of Mrs. Reed and Mrs. McCabe. They never would give us the phone records of the homeowner. They took more than 16 months to give us access to the victim's clothing. DNA evidence? Forget it. They weren't interested. They fought us when we wanted to find information about the homeowner's dog. They never tested the wounds on that arm for canine DNA. Or if they did, they never told us. They came up with experts that dispute the phone data. But remember, they took over a year to hand us over that data. Why? Were they too busy? A woman is charged with murder. Our expert was able to give us a report on that data in hours. If we could afford it, we'd hire an army of experts. They'd all find the same thing ours did, because it ain't rocket science. Searches were made by McCabe on how long to die in the cold. Messages and calls were deleted. We hired one of the most reputable data analysts out there, but it's actually not complicated. If you delete a call, and I'm not sure why you ever would, but if you did, there is a record of that call on your phone and a record of the deletion. A phone is a computer. And you know how computers work. Every change that's made is logged in. You just have to go into the file and print it out. Good work if you can get it, right? Our expert also found data from the health app. This also ain't rocket science. Your phone records with precision your location and altitude. It matches this against very precise data it has on every square inch of this earth. Google can't see inside your house, at least not that it will admit to. So it doesn't know if you're going upstairs inside your house or whether for some reason your house has a hill inside or maybe a fire pole. But it knows when you're at the location of a house. It doesn't know whether you've climbed a ladder onto the roof and are hanging up there stargazing. It knows your location and it knows your altitude. If you're at the location of a house and your altitude changes, the algorithm deduces that you are walking up and down stairs inside the house. John O'Keefe's phone data tells us he went inside the house and changed his elevation in a way that was equivalent to him going up and down 3 flights of stairs. Can we tell for sure he went up and down stairs? No, we can't eliminate the possibility that he climbed a ladder onto the roof and hung out, or that there's a fire pole inside. We don't know because police refuse to inspect the house. We'll leave it up to you to decide what are the odds of a fire pole or a ladder onto the roof. But if he didn't climb to the roof or shimmy up a fire pole, he walked up and down stairs inside the home. That's not us saying that. That's the data. I want to make one more point before we call last call. You've been a great jury, and I can tell that, like me, you are passionate about the truth and about fairness. Well, we need to talk about the state's accident reconstruction theory, the fact that they don't have one. Sure, they've floated various ideas. At one point, they suggested Karen got out of her car and attacked John with a broken cocktail glass, creating wounds on his arm. Look, these guys on the other side are pretty bright people. When they propose absurd things like that, it's only because they have to. The prosecution claims that Karen Reed struck John O'Keefe in the back of the head with her taillight. This is the wound here. John was 6'3". The taillight in Karen's vehicle was 28 inches off the ground, a little more than 2 feet. How did it strike John directly in the back of the head? It's not that we demand the prosecution has to have an answer for everything that happened, but the injury is so unusual that it must be accounted for in their accident reconstruction theory. Say John fell or bent down to pick something up, perhaps to drop his cocktail glass. Maybe she drove into him, but there were no other wounds on John's body, aside from the many scratches and puncture wounds on his arm. No bruises on his torso, nothing on the back of his shoulders, nothing on his legs. How is it possible that an SUV could strike him in the back of the head and not hit any other part of his body? It's not. Remember, the blow was with such force that it crushed bones inside his skull, so it couldn't come from falling onto her taillight or onto the nearby fire hydrant. And of course, if he did fall onto the hydrant, well, my client will be innocent. Yet she is charged with second-degree murder. The prosecution can't explain how O'Keefe ended up 12 feet off the road onto the lawn. They can't explain how he ended up lying on his back in the snow on top of his phone. Let me sum things up. The other side, from the police to the prosecution, has acted shamefully. They expect you not to notice or to care. When we pointed out that the data showed John had entered the home, they tried to counter with an argument that insults our intelligence, saying that this type of location data is unreliable, and as proof, they actually had the audacity to show us how John's phone was moving after he was pronounced dead. They were trying to say that the data was unreliable because it was not possible for a dead man's phone to move. Can you actually believe they would think we're that stupid? John's phone was moving because it was picked up off the lawn by investigators. How do you feel about giving people like that, people who respect our intelligence so little, the power over your life? They can charge you with crimes, put you away, destroy you, destroy someone you love. They have that kind of power. And yet they would stand in open court in front of a judge, in front of bailiffs and officials who swear in witnesses, in front of TV cameras, and offer an argument that the phone showing movement after the victim was pronounced dead was evidence that the phone's data is suspect? Do you want these people to have that kind of power? Do you think they'll investigate themselves for this kind of misbehavior? Who will investigate them then? No one. So their power can't be opposed. They'll laugh it up at the cookout next week. Cops, prosecutors, officials, family and friends, judges, all on the same team. No one can challenge their abuses of power. No one except 12 peers that our forefathers in all their wisdom established would have the final say. 12 ordinary citizens. There will be no movies about their heroism. They'll just go home to their families and live their normal lives. They aren't connected to the power structure. They aren't protected by a thin blue line. They are us, and they are you. And the justice that protects us all is in your hands. Thank God it is.